On a spring morning in 1420 AD, the Yongle Emperor walks through the gates of his new capital, Beijing, the first city in history built from scratch in just 14 years for 1 million people. Every street silent on this first morning. Within a year, there would not be a single empty space. This is the moment China showed the world what a city could be. Nothing like it had ever been built. Today we walk through it at its peak and find out why the dynasty that built it almost erased it from memory. We are going to walk through every layer of this city. Ming Dynasty administrative records, Imperial court documents, accounts from foreign visitors, and archaeology rebuilt through AI-assisted reconstruction. So we can stand inside streets that no longer exist in the form they once took. These are informed visualizations, not photographs of the past. But they will let us see what the history books can only describe. One idea runs through every version of this story. Order, the belief that a city, like the cosmos, can be perfectly designed, and that if the design is perfect enough, everything inside it will function as intended. Beijing was built on that belief. It is also destroyed by it. A city designed for perfection cannot tolerate deviation, and when the world changes around it, a perfect system has no mechanism for adaptation. Keep that paradox in mind. Before Beijing, there was Nanjing. Pull back to 1368 AD, 50 years before our story begins. The Hongwu Emperor has just overthrown the Mongol Yuan dynasty and founded the Ming. He builds his capital in the south, at Nanjing, a city of warmth and commerce and rivers. It is a practical choice. Nanjing is wealthy, connected, defensible. But Hongwu's son has different ideas about what a capital should be. The Yongle Emperor, whose name means perpetual happiness, seizes the throne from his nephew in 1402 after a 3-year civil war. He is brilliant, ruthless, and the vision in his head requires a new city to exist. He does not want to rule from Nanjing, a city his father built, a city associated with a court that opposed him. He wants to build something that has never existed, a capital that is not merely a city, but a physical argument about the nature of power. In 1406, he gives the order. The construction of Beijing begins. Picture what that means. A site is selected on the North China Plain, where an older Mongol capital once stood. The ground is cleared. Architects and astronomers work together, because in Ming China, architecture and astronomy are not separate disciplines. The position of every gate, every hall, every courtyard is calculated in relation to celestial bodies. The city is laid out on a precise north-south axis, aligned to the pole star. The emperor, at the center of the city, sits at the center of the cosmos. This is not metaphor. This is the literal design intention, written into the planning documents that still survive. 1 million workers are mobilized. Timber comes from the forests of Sichuan, floated down rivers for thousands of miles. Stone comes from quarries outside the city, dragged on sledges over wetted roads in winter. The same technique used to move stone in ancient Egypt 2,000 years earlier. Marble comes from quarries 40 miles away. Half of China is a supply chain for this one construction site. No computers, no mechanical transport. Just tens of thousands of people moving materials across thousands of miles on a schedule tight enough to finish a city in 14 years. Now, walk through the gates in 1420. Stand at the southern entrance and look north along the central axis. What you see is not a street, it is a statement. A sequence of gates, courtyards, and halls stretches to the horizon, each one larger than the last, each one designed to reduce the visitor, any visitor, no matter how powerful, to a figure of insignificance before reaching the throne. This is the psychological architecture of absolute power. You do not arrive at the emperor. You are processed toward him, diminished at each stage, until by the time you enter the throne hall, the cumulative effect of the architecture has already established who is in control. At the center of Beijing sits the Forbidden City, Zijincheng in Chinese, the Purple Forbidden Enclosure. Purple because purple was the color associated with the pole star, the fixed point around which the heavens revolve. The emperor is the earthly equivalent of that fixed point, 9,000 rooms, the number 9 being the highest single digit in Chinese numerology, associated with the emperor and with heaven. The walls are 30 feet high, surrounded by a moat 52 meters wide. Inside, no common person may enter. Outside, No building in the city may be taller than the palace walls. The city is organized around the palace the way the solar system is organized around the sun, not by accident, but by deliberate cosmological design. Beijing in 1420 is concentric rings of access, the Forbidden City at the center, emperor, family, eunuchs, the imperial city surrounding it, senior officials, the inner city beyond, residents and commerce. Outside the walls, the suburbs where most of the million actually live. The population of Beijing in the early 15th century is the largest urban concentration on Earth. London has perhaps 50,000 people, Paris perhaps 200,000. Beijing has 1 million. The bureaucracy that manages this, water supply, food distribution, fire control, produces administrative records so detailed that modern historians can reconstruct the daily food supply of the capital and the salaries of individual officials down to their monthly rice rations. Walk north through the commercial districts in 1430. The smell hits you before the sound. Charcoal smoke, roasting meat, the sharp edge of vinegar from the pickle stalls. The main commercial streets are crowded with guild shops organized by trade. Silk merchants occupy one district, porcelain dealers another. The book markets of Beijing in the Ming period are famous throughout China. Woodblock printing has been producing books in China for 5 centuries, and the capital's markets carry texts from every province. A visitor from Europe in this period would encounter a publishing industry centuries more developed than anything at home. The Yongle Emperor's court receives ambassadors from Korea, Japan, Central Asia, the Middle East, and East Africa, brought to Beijing by the treasure fleets of the Admiral Zheng He, whose voyages reach as far as the Persian Gulf and the East African coast. Beijing in the early Ming is not an isolated capital. It is the city to which the known world sends tribute, but the city's perfection contains its own danger. The Yongle Emperor rules for 22 years and transforms China. He moves the capital, launches the treasure fleets, commissions the Yongle Dadian, the largest encyclopedia ever compiled, over 22,000 volumes summarizing all Chinese knowledge. He is one of the most consequential rulers in Chinese history. He is also a usurper who seized the throne from his nephew in a civil war. That fact never leaves the room. Picture the court in his final years. The enormous throne hall, the ranks of officials in embroidered robes prostrating on cold stone floors, the silence that precedes every imperial pronouncement. The city functions exactly as designed. The axis holds. The gates open and close on schedule. Everything is in order. And underneath all of it, the question that nobody speaks aloud. What happens when this man is gone? When Yongle passes in 1424, his son rules for less than a year. The court that follows is more conservative, more inward-looking, more suspicious of everything the previous reign had built. The treasure fleet voyages are curtailed and then canceled. The ships rot in harbors. The records of the voyages, the navigational charts, the diplomatic correspondence, the detailed accounts of foreign lands are suppressed. A court official named Liu Daxia reportedly burns the archive of the voyages entirely, declaring that the expeditions had been a waste of resources. Whether this burning actually occurred or is legend, the effect is the same. China turns inward. The most sophisticated naval network in the world dissolves within a generation of its creation. The Yongle Dadian, 22,000 volumes of accumulated knowledge, suffers a similar fate. The original manuscript survives for a century. Then, in 1557, a fire damages the palace and the court orders a copy made. The copy is completed in 1567. Within decades, the original is lost. By the 19th century, the copy itself begins to be dispersed, stolen by foreign powers during the invasions of the late Qing, sold, scattered across libraries in London, Washington, Berlin, and Tokyo. Today, fewer than 400 volumes of the original 11,000 in the copy survive. The largest encyclopedia in human history, compiled on the order of the emperor who built this city, exists today in fragments scattered across a dozen countries. The Forbidden City itself nearly vanishes twice. In 1644, rebel armies breach the walls of Beijing after a siege. The last Ming emperor walks alone to a hill overlooking the Forbidden City, Coal Hill, just north of the palace, and does not come back down. Li Zicheng, the rebel leader, enters the Forbidden City and sits briefly on the dragon throne. He has held it for one day when he hears that Manchu forces are approaching from the north. He orders the palace set on fire and leaves. The Manchu Qing dynasty rides in, extinguishes the flames, and takes possession. The Manchu Qing dynasty, entering from the north, extinguishes the fires and takes possession. They rule from the same palace, in the same halls, sitting on the same throne. But they are not Chinese, and their presence in the Forbidden City transforms it from an expression of Ming cosmological order into something more ambiguous, a symbol of continuity for some, a symbol of conquest for others. The second near destruction comes in the 20th century. When the People's Republic is established in 1949, serious proposals are made to demolish the old imperial city entirely and build a modern capital from scratch. The architect Liang Xicheng argues passionately for preservation. He loses the argument on most points. Much of old Beijing is demolished to build wide socialist boulevards. But the Forbidden City survives. Today it receives more visitors annually than any other cultural monument on Earth. Beijing today is not the city Yongle built. The central axis survives. You can still walk it from the southern gate to the drum tower in the north. And the alignment to the pole star still holds. The Forbidden City stands, restored and accessible. Its red walls and golden roofs as precise as they were in 1420. But the city that surrounded it, the guild districts, the temple complexes, the ancient Hutong neighborhoods of courtyard houses, has been largely replaced by a modern metropolis of 20 million people. Beijing is not one city. It is every version of itself compressed into the same north-south axis. Mongol capital, Ming masterpiece, Qing imperial seat, Republican capital, socialist showcase, and global megacity. Each layer built on the foundations of the last, all of them oriented to the same fixed point in the northern sky that the Yongle Emperor chose 600 years ago. The axis is still there. The pole star has not moved. Drop in the comments and tell me where you are watching from. And tell me which ancient city you want to walk through next.